A very warm evening to the distinguished dignitaries, faculty members, students. It is said that technology is a tool and law ensures it serves both humanity and the planet. With this thought in mind, we begin with day 4 of the International Speaker Series hosted by Faculty of Law, GLS University. To commence this session, we begin with the welcome address by our Dean, Dr. Mayuri H. Pandya at Faculty of Law, GLS University. Ma'am is an eminent academician and expert member of the Environment Appellant Authority, Government of Gujarat, who also contributes to the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change Appraisal Committee at the national level. Ma'am, over to you for the inaugural session today.
Thank you, Ritika. A very warm welcome to Dr. Natalia and all my dear students and everyone who has joined on this virtual platform. I am truly delighted to welcome all of you on the day 4 of this International Speaker Series. As the series progresses, our discussions continue to reflect the dynamic intersections of law, technology, environment, and human rights. Following enriching deliberations on climate justice, renewable energy disputes, and maritime governance, today's session brings us a highly contemporary and evolving theme, the role of artificial intelligence within the environmental law and its intersection.
Hi, can you hear me? Ma'am, sorry for the technical glitch. So we are back now.
Am I audible? Natalia, am I audible?
Yes, yes,
Yes,
yes.
yes,
Yes, ma'am.
yes. Okay. Sorry for the, there was some, this is what the limitation of the technology. Anyways, I once again welcome all of you to today's session and day 4. This session is particularly significant as it explores how emerging technologies such as the artificial intelligence can both challenge and strengthen the environmental governance, accountability, and right-based frameworks. Because in today's era, the role of artificial intelligence, especially for the environmental law, is very, very crucial to understand. The discussion promises to stimulate the critical thinking on regulatory responses to technological advancements in environmental protection. I extend a special welcome to all the students. Your curiosity and engagement are very vital to the success of this series. This platform is intended to inspire you to think beyond the traditional legal boundaries and engage with the interdisciplinary legal development. Once again, I warmly welcome each one of you and wish you a very stimulating and insightful session. Thank you, and over to Vidita.
Thank you, ma'am, for your motivating address. As we move ahead, I would now like to introduce Dr. Natalia, Chief Operating Officer at the Global Network for the Study of Human Rights, Pennsylvania, USA. Dr. Natalia is an accomplished legal scholar and practitioner in the fields of human rights, climate justice, and environmental laws. Ma'am, Ma'am's work spans environmental, constitutional, administrative, and human rights law with a focus on the differentiated impacts of climate change and environmental rights on marginalized communities. Her research includes the Colombian environmental peace building process, climate litigation in Latin America, and gendered dimensions of environmental governance. MAM serves as a national rapporteur for Colombia within the Sabin Center's peer review network on climate litigation and contributes scholarly work on climate justice, environmental rights, and legal innovation in international human rights practices. Her publications and collaborations in peer-reviewed journals and edited volumes reflects her commitment to advancing interdisciplinary perspectives on human rights and environmental laws. Dr. Natalia's role in global networks and editorial work underscores her engagements in shaping international discourse on climate law, ecological rights, and human rights protection. So, ma'am, it is a privilege to have you with us. And I hope that the insight that you provide on the topic artificial intelligence and its intersection with environmental law benefits our students. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you so much. And thank you. The privilege is all mine. Thank you again for the opportunity of being here today and to share some some comments on the topic. I will like could you help me please with
Ma'am,
the slides?
sorry to interrupt. Ma'am, sorry to interrupt, but I just want you to reshare the slide so that I can put
Oh,
it up from my end
of
due
course.
to the
Oh,
network constraints.
okay. I think they are
Yeah, I've
available.
got it, ma'am. I've got it.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
so as I was saying, I want us all today to talk about human rights and the environment, the intersection of human rights and the environment, while also looking at climate change and in particular climate litigation as a scenario to enhance this intersection. And we will then talk also about the role of AI, and we will use it sort of like a case study to see how this intersection of human rights and the environment plays out in such a topical issue. So the origins of international human rights law and international environmental law were completely independent. They started and emerged and developed with almost no regard for one another. In recent years, this has changed. Both like human rights bodies, scholars, UN special rapporteurs have started to further the connections between international human rights law and international environmental law. Uh, this has been done, as we will see a little bit in more detail in just a few minutes, through an understanding that the international human rights law regime encompasses the environment in what has been deemed as the greening of human rights. And they have also, like the further academia and UN bodies, have argued in favor of the recognition of a separate and autonomous human right to a healthy, clean, and sustainable environment. So environmental degradation, like the basis of these efforts towards furthering the connections between the two fields relies on the fact that environmental degradation affects the enjoyment of human rights. A healthy environment is seen as essential to the protection of several human rights, including the right to life, dignity, water, food, cultural rights, and property. But as I mentioned, this was not reflected at the beginning. International human rights law came into existence in the aftermath of World War II. So at the time, the concerns were focused on the heinous acts that were carried during the war, and environmental conditions needed to realize the rights that were being recognized were not regarded or even considered. The main concern in that moment was to protect the individual from state abuse of power. So environmental abuses, while they were ongoing, were not at the forefront. And similarly, in the early beginnings of international environmental law, the focus was mainly on resource management and transnational duties, and human rights were largely absent. Um, the f- yeah, sorry. Like the first instance in international environmental law where we can see, although not as explicit as it has become now, of this, like, not towards an intersection between human rights and the environment, it can be found in the Stockholm Declaration. It's the principal one is considered as the basis for establishing this link. It does mention that the human has the fundamental right to freedom, equality, and adequate conditions of life in an environment of a quality that permits life of dignity and well-being, and that the human bears the responsibility to protect and improve the environment for present and future generations. But as I mentioned, even though it is very forward thinking, this provision did not explicitly declare a right to a healthy environment, nor did it make the connections categorically apparent. It did ignite the discussion surrounding human beings' entitlement to a healthy and productive and sustainable environment. which could arguably have led us to today's increasing interconnectedness. So one other significant aspect of the relationship between these two fields is that as a subset of international law, international environmental law is mainly concerned with state-to-state relationships, and its mechanisms and remedies follow this approach. So to overcome this hurdle, many individuals and groups have resorted to international human rights law as a way to find remedy to environmental harms that have been caused to them. Some scholars have argued that the adoption of the two foundational human rights covenants, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights and the International Covenant on Social, Economic, and Cultural Rights in 1966, strengthened this connection and the recognition of the interdependence of all human rights, which could arguably have opened the door for other rights, such as environmental rights. And another important aspect that I want to highlight here is that the human rights language has become instrumental in the participation of the Global South in environmental movement worldwide. Adding this human rights layer to environmental issues have allowed Global South countries to fight for the inclusion of critical issues that were not included before, such as the right to self-determination and the right to economic development. So we can see that the relationship between international human rights law and international environmental law has been advanced at least in three ways. So one, by selecting among the human rights catalog those that are relevant to environmental protection. Two, by reinterpreting human rights to include an environmental dimension in what has been called the greening of human rights. And three, by adopting an autonomous and standalone right to a healthy, clean, and sustainable environment. I additionally argue that the recent advisory opinions on climate change and climate litigation more broadly also have helped to strengthen the nexus, and we will also touch upon this a little bit in a while. So to dive into this relationship, I would like to start with the first point of convergence, which is human rights that are relevant to environmental protection. And this set of human rights that have been particularly studied are procedural rights. These procedural rights have the potential to enhance environmental protection through the exercise of existing effective measures in international human rights law and have already been included in many international environmental law agreements. Among those relevant procedural rights to environmental protection, we find the right to environmental information, the right to public participation in international environmental law decision-making, and the right to a remedy for environmental harm. These rights have find the basis in Principle 10 of the Rio Declaration. We can see that this principle includes all of them and not only mentions the importance of having access to information and having access to public participation, but also it shows how they are all interconnected and how they all reinforce each other. So the right to environmental information embodies the importance of accessing information to ensure a meaningful participation and to monitor governmental and private sector actions. Access to information can also be proved useful to develop new techniques and activities in a sustainable manner. So this Principle 10 embodies the importance of accessing environmental information as a prerequisite for other rights. So as I was mentioned, that interconnectedness and interdependence of rights. Several agreements include the access, already include this right to access information. And we can see that in the Aarhus Convention or the Escazú Agreement for the Latin America context. We can see that these include specific provisions on, for example, the Escazú Agreement includes specific provisions on the protection of environmental defenders and the access to justice and the work that they do. But some of the most influential international agreements, like the UNFCCC and the Convention of the Biological Diversity, only contain what can be seen as a weak provision that does not specifically impose an obligation on states to provide relevant environmental information. The second procedural right relevant to international environmental law is public participation. This is of particularly importance to the legitimacy of law itself. It deals with who gets to be a part of and decide what becomes international environmental law. So it touches upon issues of epistemic justice, gets to talk about who gets to sit at the table, whose voice is being heard. So in that, this right in particular reminds us of often ignored groups of historically marginalized communities, such as women, indigenous people, farmers, workers, youth, among many others. And in that sense, these very same communities have been strong advocates of the right to meaningful participation in decision-making spaces, as a way to not only recognize the damage that has been done, but also like to shift the power dynamics behind knowledge production and decision-making. The third right that we're gonna talk about today is the right to an effective remedy for environmental harm, which is also embodied in Principle 10 of the Rio Declaration, and calls for an effective access to justice and other proceedings to seek redress and remedy. Providing the effective mechanisms to access a timely and comprehensive remedy can be seen as a way to implement the polluter pays principle. And it also entails the obligation of states to remove jurisdictional barriers to civil proceedings for damages and other remedies that could have derived from environmental harm. The second path of convergence between international human rights law and international environmental law is the grading of human rights, as I initially mentioned. And it is based on the fact that the interdependence of human rights and the environment serves to reinterpret existing human rights to include its environmental dimensions. So there is growing evidence that environmental degradation negatively impacts the enjoyment of human rights to the point where it is virtually impossible to address one without the other. So environmental protection is arguably embedded within the human rights framework already. Some of the rights that are that have been reinterpreted to show their environmental dimensions include civil and political rights, as well as economic and social and cultural rights. So, for example, the right to life and the related right to health are a clear example of this. We can see that respiratory illnesses have been linked to air pollution, water pollution, such as lead poisoned water can cause damage to the brain and kidneys and interfere with red blood cell production. Radioactive waste can cause life-threatening cancer and genetic defects, and excessive heat from global warming, for example, can cause death, especially in the older populations. We can also see how the right to culture can be significantly affected by environmental degradation. So, for example, sea level rises that come from climate change, low-lying areas and small island states have started to see entire portions of their territory disappear. And this affects not only the place where they live, but also their relationship to land. So we see how indigenous and local communities have a different relationship to the land, with an aspect that has been recognized by international legal community. And as a result, these environmental impacts result in the loss of sacred spaces and the fact that they are no longer able to carry carry on their millenary practices and traditional practices. Environmental degradation also infringes the right to food, which is contained in the right to an adequate standard of living. The obligation of states is to ensure that food is accessible, adequate, and available. The lack of environmental protection can lead to a disruption of the food supply chain. For example, if extreme weather events affect food crops, and most farmers might not be able to or might not be equipped to deal with it. And the same goes to water. So the third path of convergence between the fields, as initially mentioned, is the autonomous right to a healthy, clean, and sustainable environment. To this date, there is no global international agreement that recognizes the right to a healthy environment, but at the regional level, many treaties either recognize it or include some sort of reference to it. The first one to include a recognition of the right to a healthy environment was the African Charter on Human Rights and People's Rights, The San Salvador Protocol also includes this right in the Inter-American system. The Arab Chart and the Aarhus Convention and Escazú agreements, they also all include a reference to the right to a healthy environment. In addition to that, regional bodies have also started to recognize the environment as an autonomous human right, as is particularly the case of the Inter-American Court of Human Rights. And nationally, domestic constitutions worldwide also recognize the right to a healthy, clean, and sustainable environment. The specific terms might change from country to country, and judicial decisions to protect the environment and to protect this right have also started to recognize it as an independent right with intrinsic value. And all of this led to the recognition of the right to a clean and healthy environment, first by the Human Rights Council in 2021, and then eventually in 2022 by the United Nations General Assembly. And in this resolution, the General Assembly reaffirmed the right status as an autonomous human right. And it also calls for the implementation of environmental treaties as a way to realize the right to a healthy, clean, healthy, and sustainable environment, and links it to other existing rights as well. However, it still remains to be seen, and it's still very unclear how this right interacts with other human rights in the human rights system, but that is something that, as I argue next, climate litigation, in general, environmental litigation, but in particular climate litigation, and more specific, the recent climate change advisory opinions have started to help clear the relationship. So the world recently bear witness to 3 advisory opinions that are relevant to human rights and the environment relationship. There is one that is forthcoming. And even though these are non-binding in nature, they are authoritative, and the prestige of the courts carries significant weight. And it is expected for these advisory opinions to shape international law, national policy, and courtroom strategies. So the first one that I want to talk about today is the ITLOS, the International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea advisory opinion. This was the first time that an international tribunal issued an advisory opinion on state obligations on climate change. It addresses several key questions regarding the application of the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea in the context of climate change, including the interaction between UNCLOS and the global climate change regime. And it also includes specific obligations of states to reduce climate greenhouse gas emissions. Among other things, ITLOS concluded that under Article 194 of UNCLOS, states had the obligation to take all necessary measures to prevent, reduce, control marine pollution from anthropogenic greenhouse gas emissions. And it also considered that UNCLOS imposes a due diligence standard that is stringent. And this is important because UNCLOS recognized that anthropogenic greenhouse gas emissions are a form of marine pollution. But in this case, the advisory opinion did not focus on human rights and the environment nexus. So there is not much mention of that in that advisory opinion. On the contrary, the Inter-American Court of Human Rights was very, very comprehensive in its relationship of human rights and the environment. First, I wanted to mention that in 2017, the Inter-American Court of Human Rights had recognized the right to an autonomous the right to a healthy environment as an autonomous and justiciable right, not contingent on showing direct harm to an individual, and affirmed that environmental degradation itself can trigger violations of rights to life and personal integrity, even in transboundary matters. This advisory opinion was later used as a basis for a contentious case before the same court that also recognized the autonomous right to a healthy environment, and now in a contentious case and not as an advisory opinion, in the case of LACA ONAT indigenous community. In this case, the court declared that Argentina violated an autonomous right to a healthy environment to indigenous community property, cultural identity, food, and water, and ordered specific measures of reparation, including access to adequate food and water and recovery of forest resources and indigenous culture. And more recently, the advisory opinion number 32 of 2025 continued with this, developing this intersection of human rights and the environment. Both substantively and procedurally, this opinion is innovative, and it was truly participatory. It is arguably the most participatory proceeding in the history of the Inter-American Court. States, academics, civil society, international bodies, communities all contributed. There were over 200 written interventions. The court also held public hearings that were strategically located in Barbados and Brazil. And substantively, I think as a result of this highly participatory proceeding, the opinion is very heavily focused on provisions that challenge structural inequality and places a special focus on clarifying obligations that concern specifically vulnerable groups. The court drew on its extensive jurisprudence on structural inequality and emphasized the differentiated and disproportionate effects of climate change on vulnerable groups. Importantly, the court recognized that these are not a monolith, that they should be treated as heterogeneous groups, and that there is importance in contextual and dynamic nature of their vulnerability. It stresses the obligation of states to design climate measures that reflect the lived experiences and to prioritize resources to ensure culturally appropriate adaptation and facilitate meaningful participation in decision-making. It also embraces intersectionality and, to our point, situated climate change within the human rights framework by explicitly recognizing a right to a healthy climate, both in its individual and collective dimensions, and link state responsibility to the breach of international obligations aimed to protect the global climate system. It clarified that given the scale and irreversibility of climate harms, states must act with reinforced due diligence. It also articulated that states were required to rely on the best available science, which includes treating the IPCC assessment reports as a central repository of such science. So together, these two advisory opinions provide the domestic courts across Latin America a coherent inter-American frame that connects environmental integrity, climate action, and fundamental rights. And the last advisory opinion that we have as of today, it's the International Court of Justice advisory opinion. This opinion is groundbreaking. I'm sure we've all heard about it and started to discuss the particular aspects this opinion brings to the debate. It clarifies the state's duties under international law to protect the climate system. It talks about the specific ways in which international law interacts. So, for example, how treaty and customary obligations related to climate change can and should interact and coexist. It also solidified the interdependence of human rights and environmental protection. There is a specific section on this. And again, even though these are non-binding, the prestige of the court conveys the importance of addressing the legal consequences of the climate crisis. So we can expect legal strategies in global climate litigation to rely heavily on the advisory opinion. This advisory opinion is also heavily grounded on scientific knowledge, and it also deems the IPCC reports as the best available science. The last advisory opinion which we are expecting is the African Court of Human and People's Rights. We are expecting this to come maybe later this year. It's currently still waiting for amicus briefs and written submissions. And it is expected that it will focus on African states' obligations and the differentiated impacts of climate change on Africa. So now we're going to dive into artificial intelligence and the relationship with human rights and the environment. As I'm sure we've all heard, artificial intelligence, or AI, has been widely promoted as a tool for sustainable development and climate mitigation, among other things. However, its deployment relies on vast physical infrastructures and global supply chains that carry environmental and human rights consequences that are not always at the forefront of the debates. From the extraction of raw materials to the operation of hyperscale data centers, AI value chain demands enormous amounts of water, energy, and minerals, resources that are disproportionately sourced from the global south. The environmental costs of AI are not separate from the human rights costs, and they are deeply entangled. AI is believed to enhance efficiency across energy systems, to reduce emissions, and to enable new breakthroughs in environmental sustainability. However, this narrative of innovation and sustainability obscures a more complex and contradictory reality. AI is deeply material. It's a resource-intensive system that is built upon global infrastructures, cheap labor, and extractive practices that remain largely invisible in mainstream discourse. Across its life cycle, from data collection to model training to building the semiconductors to hardware disposal, AI consumes vast quantities of energy, water, and minerals while emitting significant greenhouse gas emissions. So, for example, training a single large model can evaporate 700,000 liters of fresh water. It is also estimated that by 2027, global AI could account for 4.2 to 6.6 billion cubic meters of water withdrawal, which is more than the total annual water use of several European nations combined. These impacts arise not only from the demand for cooling data centers, but also from water-intensive electricity generation and manufacturing processes in global supply chains. Beyond water use, and according to other estimates, using, for example, ChatGPT requires nearly 10 times as much electricity as a regular Google search. And this problem is further accelerated by the current race to merge search engines with AI. Goldman Sachs projects that electricity consumption by data centers will grow by 160% this year in 2026. The International Energy Agency also predicted that the demand for electricity could more than double. Against this backdrop, most of the up-to-date regulations on this issue are focused mainly on disclosure requirements. So, for example, the European Union AI Act requires the development of technical standards, that the development of technical standards must consider the energy consumption of AI systems. So, but these kind of measures offer visibility, but no binding constraints. So in reality, they failed to meet the emerging standards of climate due diligence, which we saw that were included in some of the advisory opinions, and that call not only for transparency, but also for enforceable obligations to mitigate environmental harm. As it has been long recognized in the extractive industries, disclosure alone, however sophisticated, cannot rectify the structural drivers of ecological damage. Even though algorithmic and hardware improvements have made individual computations more efficient, the exponential growth of AI and in AI demand outpaces those gains, and it leads to a net increase in energy and water consumption. And moreover, optimizing for one environmental metric, so for example, carbon reduction, often entails trade-offs that worsen others, such as water depletion. And this fragmented logic not only obscures AI's full environmental cost, but also impedes a coordinated effort to reduce it. For example, business and human rights scholars have criticized this tendency as a form of greenwashing that misinterprets short-term improvements while reinforcing extractive and unsustainable practices. And the fact that AI is deeply interdependent with human and more than human life forms, such as raw materials, territories, and communities, makes metaphors like the cloud highly untenable. So the case of water is illustrative of the social and environmental issues that are arising from AI. We can see how the expansion of hyperscale data centers in water-stressed regions such as Chile or Mexico has sparked resistance from communities that are concerned about losing access to potable water. And in many cases, these infrastructures are imposed without proper consultation or transparency, which reflects broader dynamics of digital colonialism and environmental injustice, particularly in the global south. So now I want us to focus on Latin America. Latin America is a region that occupies several strategically vital, although unequal positions in the global AI value chain. It furnishes the raw materials, for example, from the lithium triangle, the so-called lithium triangle of Argentina, Bolivia, and Chile, as well as all other transition minerals. But these benefits are mainly realized in northern industries and countries who in turn benefit from green innovations. Latin America is also wooing a semiconductor investment with countries such as Mexico, Costa Rica, Brazil, and Argentina, building or planning fabs or design hubs that plug regional labor and resources into chips that are still patented and branded elsewhere. And it also hosts a fast-growing constellation of hyperscale data centers that draw vast amounts of water and fossil fuel electricity to serve global cloud and AI services. So the region is a keystone supplier and infrastructural host, while also being merely a consumer or user of high-tech innovation. And the second-hand role in global value chain is also materialized in the lack of Latin American voices in the international regulatory debate around AI. So to dive a little bit more into the realities of AI, the environmental and human rights consequences of AI, we see that, for example, lithium extraction in countries like Argentina, Chile, has intensified the violation of indigenous and local communities' rights. So at the core of AI's contradictions lies the fragmented logic of energy efficiency versus environmental and human rights impacts. And this is important because while arguing for innovation in energy use, AI remains resource intensive. And more importantly, when we use the human rights and environmental lens to critically assess the consequences of AI, we can see how the effects that are being experienced by communities on the ground also mirror colonial dynamics and are heavily disproportionate and differentiated depending on issues of pre-existing inequalities and vulnerabilities. The human right to water is neither on the ICCPR nor the ICESCR, but it is deeply intertwined with other human rights, both well-established, like the right to life and health, and emerging, like the right to a healthy environment. It has been, nonetheless, it has been developed by the United Nations through the General Comment 15, that, although non-binding, consolidates the human right to water and talks about access to quantity, quality, and accessibility, and talks about it both as a self-standing right and in relation to other human rights. In 2010, the United Nations General Assembly also explicitly recognized the right to safe and clean drinking water and sanitation, as well as the Human Rights Council recognized the connection between the right to water and the right to high sustainable standard of physical and mental health. Furthermore, if we also look into the human right to a healthy environment, we see how the different elements of this human right account for the protection, the much needed protection beyond dominant understandings of human-nature relationship, and in particularly how indigenous and local communities experience differentiated impacts due to their different relationship with nature and the land. So, for example, when they are forced to migrate due to these environmental and human rights violations, they might find it harder to find another place where they can carry on their sacred practices. Okay, so mineral extraction, as I have been mentioned, is a key component of the AI supply chain. Among the many transition minerals, lithium is a crucial component in the production of batteries used in AI hardware, electric vehicles, and renewable energy storage systems. It is also, as I have been saying, being heavily harvested in Latin America, particularly in the so-called lithium triangle. So while the decarbonization consensus emphasizes the transition to electric cars and renewable energy as essential steps towards fighting or mitigating climate change, the focus on the technological solutions neglects its environmental and socio-ecological impacts. The extraction of these minerals is performed primarily in the global south, and as I'm looking into in Latin America in particular, in this case, while production keeps taking place predominantly in places like East Asia or Europe or North America. So the benefits of lithium extraction in terms of reduced carbon emissions from electric vehicles and renewable energy storages are primarily being realized in the global north, and the global south communities are, again, bearing the burden of these costs. Lithium extraction is an intensive process, involves significant environmental degradation. In salt flats, it requires vast amounts of water to evaporate brines, worsening scarcity in already arid regions. It has produced new sacrifice zones where local communities bear the cost of supplying raw materials for the green energy transition and AI-driven digital economy of the global north. This intensive mining depletes water sources, degrades soils, erodes biodiversity, undermining traditional livelihoods such as agriculture and herding. It fuels social displacement and economic instability. And scholars that have already started to look into this have drawn the connections of how the socio-ecological impacts of AI are comparable to dominant extractivism and perpetuates exploitative practices that follow colonial dynamics. So in Chile's Atacama's desert, for example, lithium mining operations have led to substantial depletion of local water resources, affecting indigenous communities and ecosystems. The salar de Atacama is sinking by 1 to 2 centimeters annually due to brine extraction from lithium. This water scarcity affects the local agropastoral practices such as quinoa and alfalfa growing and other livestock raising. And the human rights of the indigenous community are being negatively impacted. Significantly, water relations are vital and central to the ways of life of the Lican and Thai indigenous community due to a long history of adaptation to one of the most arid environments in the world. Similarly, the Salar de Maricunga has sparked concerns among indigenous communities who have historically inhabited the region. And they are already warning of environmental risks and threats to their cultural traditions. A similar situation can be found in Peru with the Quelcaya Glacier, which is the second largest glacier in the tropics, and which is already in fragile conditions. So the communities there fear that heavy metal contamination damage will bring damage to vital landscapes, threats to biodiversity, and the erosion of the cultural traditions. Furthermore, the promised economic benefits rarely reach these local communities. Profits are largely concentrated in multinational corporations and exported to the global north, which reinforces patterns of inequality and exploitation. But not all is lost. The rights, like the human rights and environmental lens, and the increasing interconnectedness of these two fields has also retained a potential for social and environmental justice. And communities in Latin America are already mobilizing using this framework as a tool for emancipation. So, for example, in Argentina, civil society organizations, local and indigenous communities are raising socio-ecological concerns over the government and the lithium mining companies' activities, and are denouncing severe human rights and environmental violations in Argentina's Salinas Grandes and Laguna de Guayatayoc. They specifically bring claims of the lack of free, prior, and informed consultation from indigenous communities, which infringes indigenous communities' rights to self-determination and meaningful participation in decision-making, environmental decision-making. Further, they also invoke or reference that all of these aspects are being magnified by the current climate crisis. And the same can be said of the cases in Peru and Bolivia, where residents and advocate groups are already raising concerns of mismanagement and environmental risks at facilities of AI in the Salar de Uyuni, for example, in Bolivia. So just to conclude today's talk, we've discussed how international environmental law and international human rights law have converged through at least, I say, four paths. First, through the select relevant human rights to human rights relevant to the environmental protection, which we saw as the procedural rights, also through the reinterpretation of existing rights in what has been called the greening of human rights, more recently through the recognition of the autonomous human right to a healthy, clean, and sustainable environment, and also through climate jurisprudence, and in particular the recent advisory opinions on climate and states' obligations in the context of climate change. And what we can see now as being the next frontier is to integrate AI governance into environmental and human rights frameworks, which, as we can see, can help us not only recognize the actual and real consequences that the AI global supply chain is having on the ground, but could also help us promote efforts to overcome these hurdles and to shift the way the power dynamics in extractivism and global sustainable development and the alleged green transition have operated for years. So thank you, and I look forward to your comments or questions.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for an insightful session. And over to students now for a question answer round. So, students, if at all there are any questions, we would take up 2 to 3 questions.
Good afternoon, ma'am. Am I audible?
Yes, just if you can speak a little bit louder, that would be great.
First of all, ma'am, thank you so much for such an insightful session regarding the instant topic. My question is, what are the ethical concerns while we use AI in environmental governance? Hello.
Yeah. No, I was gonna ask, should I reply right away or should we gather all the questions and then I'll reply?
Ma'am,
It's
whatever
very
you feel comfortable.
Okay, yeah. So yeah, I
So
can.
if you want, ma'am, if you want a couple of questions, like 2 to 3 questions, if you want to note it down and then answer all at one go, we are perfectly okay with it.
Yeah, I think that would be great.
Sure, ma'am, sure.
Thanks.
So, students, any other question?
Thank you so much, ma'am, for your response.
Good evening, ma'am. Am I audible? My question is how environmental law assessment projects adapt the artificial intelligence projects.
Can you please speak a little louder, better?
How do environmental law based law environmental based laws adapt to artificial intelligence based projects?
Environmental based laws attack artificial based, artificial intelligence based laws. Yes, ma'am.
Hello, ma'am. Am I audible? Hello, ma'am. My question is can artificial intelligence support climate litigation through data analysis and predictive modeling?
The last question,
I
continue
want
better.
how do you foresee artificial intelligence governing environmental laws in the next decade?
Yes, ma'am. Done, ma'am.
Okay. Thank you. Do we have another question?
Yes.
My question is, who should be held accountable if artificial intelligence systems cause environmental harm?
Okay. Okay. So I'm gonna go ahead and answer now.
Yes, ma'am. Sure.
Okay, thank you.
Please
So
sit
this
better while ma'am answers.
so these are all great questions. Thank you for that. I see that, for example, regarding ethical concerns while using AI, I mean, they will. Do you hear me okay? Because I'm hearing an echo. Okay, great, thank you. I think it's better now. Yeah, so ethical concerns, while we use AI in environmental governance, are gonna be there for sure. I think it comes from precisely what we're seeing are the environmental and human rights consequences of the use of AI. But this is not exclusive of environmental governance. I mean, this goes beyond environmental governance and touches upon all sorts of fields. I see how that could play an important role, and I think it should. I think when we bring in ethical concerns into environmental governance, we can have a better understanding of how these consequences actually play out and how the differentiated and disproportionate impacts of AI in this case uh, are always being experienced by the usual suspects. So everyone who has been historically marginalized, who's been historically set sidelined, whose knowledge is not being counted. And I think these ethical concerns raises those questions and brings these issues to the forefront of environmental governance. Regarding like the second question, like, to be honest, I'm not very sure I understood correctly, but I think and I hope I'm addressing this right. I think we were saying like, how could environmental laws adapt to AI laws? And I think that more than adapting, like environmental law, adapting to AI, I think first it should be the other way around. Like, I think AI should be the one, like AI-based laws should be the one adapting to environmental law and human rights as well. But in addition to that, I think there should be like a more direct dialogue between the frameworks and the people behind these both frameworks. Like, I think the dialogue should be back and forth. I think that's the only way we can actually think of overcoming some of the hurdles that we are seeing right now with the laws that are being implemented in AI. So as I mentioned, the European Union AI Act, it does have some important disclosure requirements, but we've also seen, like historically, with other type of activities that bring harm to the environment as well, we've seen how those are not enough. So we do need to tackle this in a different way, and an open dialogue between two frameworks could be a way to do that. Regarding the third question, I think that's a very good question, and I think it brings me to talk a little bit about epistemic justice as well, because we see that in climate change and climate litigation, attribution science is becoming more and more important, and we can see how having this information and this data available has also served climate justice, achieving climate justice. And we can indeed envision how AI driven data could also help enhance our understanding of the climate crisis, and could also even eventually help with accountability and attribution. That said, I think what's important here is that we acknowledge the reality of AI as it relates to environmental and human rights concerns. And when we do that and we apply a critical human rights lens, environmental and human rights lens to AI and AI governance, we can see how the law can serve as a tool to enhance these dynamics. So what I'm trying to say here is that, and why I talk about epistemic justice as well, is because when we talk about science and we refer, as the advisory opinions actually did, to the IPCC reports as the best available science, we might end up relying in the future, in the not so far away future, on AI. And when we do that, we might be sidelining other forms of science that are not in the hegemony, that are not considered mainstream science. And that is something that could also be happening with AI if we rely entirely on AI. But to answer your question, I do think there is some value in the advances that technology and innovation are doing for attribution science and understanding our climate crisis much better. But there are a lot of concerns and issues that also need to be addressed if we want things to change and if we want power dynamics to shift. The fourth question, how do I foresee, I hope I have this right, how do I foresee artificial intelligence governance in the next decades related to environmental law? I think it was something along those lines. That is hard. That is a hard question to answer, especially given the pace at which AI is development, and it is clear that the law is way behind what is going on with AI development. I do think we need to catch up. I think the legal scenario, the legal forum needs to do better and try to start having these hard conversations, start having this dialogue. I know there are a lot of other external factors that influence the way the law is or is not engaged with these advances. But if we're talking about a beautiful world where we are all concerned about our future and the environment, we should definitely be having these conversations more often, and the law needs to be more active in this. And the last question is a very hard question, who is going to be held accountable? And I'm guessing that's part of the reason why these external factors are pushing for less regulations and governance. But it will depend. If we look at this from the international environmental law and international human rights law regime, the claims are mostly against states. So the states could be held accountable for perhaps, and here I'm just this is my own opinion. This is something that I can see happening. States could be, they could be held accountable for lack of monitoring, lack of foreseeable, for not enacting the necessary regulations for this. If we do move forward with the integration of AI in environmental and human rights frameworks, and drawing from the recent advisory opinions on climate change, states could also arguably eventually be held accountable for private actors' actions. But I would say there is a long way. to be able to do that claim with regards to AI. But we have seen how the courts, in the context of the climate crisis, have started to move that way as well. I hope I got them all.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for patiently answering the questions that our students had. And now it's time to conclude today's session. For the same, I would like to invite Dr. Sneha Shukla, Vice Director, Faculty of Law, GLS University, and alumni of IIM Ahmedabad with over 20 years of academic excellence. Ma'am has significantly contributed in research, institutional development, and legal education. Ma'am, over to you for vote of thanks.
Thank you, Ridhita. It is my privilege to propose vote of thanks for today's deeply engaging and thought-provoking session. As Stephen Hawking once observed, artificial intelligence is likely to be either the best or worst thing to happen to humanity. That insight resonates profoundly with today's deliberations, reminding us that trajectory of technology is ultimately shaped by legal, ethical, and institutional frameworks we choose to build around it. I am deeply grateful to Ms. Urzola, Chief Operating Officer at the Global Network for the Study of Human Rights and Environment, Pennsylvania, USA, for her compelling address on AI and its interaction with environmental law. Her presentation skillfully explored the evolving interface between artificial intelligence and environmental governance, while critically examining the human rights and ethical considerations emerging from technological advancement. The discourse underscored the responsibility of law to evolve in step with innovation, ensuring that progress remained aligned with environmental sustainability and fundamental rights. With deep respect and gratitude, I extend my regards to Sri Sudhir Nanavati Sir, President, GLS University, an exemplary leader whose vision consistently advances our global academic initiatives. I also acknowledge the encouragement extended by Dr. Chandni Kapadia Ma'am, Executive Director, GLS University, whose support enables initiatives of international significance. My sincere regards to Dr. Dharmesh Shah, Provost, GLS University, to Mr. Shashank Shah, Chief Financial Officer, GLS University, and all the office bearers. I also thank Dr. Mayuri Pandya Ma'am, Dean, Faculty of Law, whose commitment and foresight have shaped this international speaker series into a meaningful platform for global exchange. My appreciation for our faculty members, coordinators, student volunteers, and participants whose presence and insightful contributions added depth and vibrancy to today's deliberations. As we approach the culmination of this enriching series, we eagerly wait for the final session on day 5, in which Dr. Tina Maria, Associate Professor at University of Helsinki, Finland, will deliver her address on governing carbon across value chains, CCU, and the structural limits of European Union environmental law. With gratitude to everyone who has contributed to this journey of ideas and dialogue, I look forward to welcoming you to the concluding session of Global Juris Connect, a scholarly convergence international speaker series. Thank you and have a great evening ahead.
Thank you, ma'am. And with this, we conclude day 4 of our session. Our sincere appreciation to Dr. Natalia, to our faculty members, and all participants who have joined us on this online platform. Thank you so much and see you all tomorrow.
Thank you all.